Cool. So I can figure out, there we go. Let's start. Alrighty. So can you all see the presentation? Fantastic. So good evening and welcome everybody. My name is Amanda Hodgman. I'm with the Chicago Undersea Explorers Society, and we are all here tonight for a quick introduction to human factors in diving. So I do see lots of new names tonight, so I want to give a quick introduction to CUES. Who are we, the Chicago Undersea Explorers Society? So CUES is a group of scuba divers and friends who are excited to cultivate a community of diverse and curious divers. So fundamentally, we strive to bring scuba education to historically excluded communities. Essentially, our main function, excuse me, we serve to provide scholarships to people who want to learn how to dive. We give opportunities to try scuba diving and to learn to scuba dive. And we partner with local nonprofit organizations to bring dive opportunities to their communities. We've also got a couple of leadership programs to try to increase diversity in the local diving community from the top down. And we hold regular diving and non-diving events just to build community. So if you're interested in learning more about us, you can visit our website at divecues.org. So a little bit about myself. As I said, my name is Amanda Hodgman. You can call me Hodge. I am one of the founding members of CUES and the former treasurer of the organization. And I am a cave and tech diver. So I first learned how to dive like 12 years ago, 14 years ago, something. But I didn't get serious about it until 2017. I started cave diving about 3 years ago and recently decided that I wanted to make that just a very significant part of my life. So I moved to Mexico so that I can do it all the time. I first learned about human factors when I was just starting my cave diving, tech diving journey. And beginning of the pandemic, I was a part of one of the first 10-week human factors webinars. I see B. Revoyer here is also a part of that class. Hi there, B. And so I was fascinated by the ideas and principles and truly believe that we can use them to become better, safer divers and to improve our dive community as well. So our objectives for tonight are to understand what human factors are and how they impact our diving. Also to learn how to incorporate principles of human factors into our own diving to reduce the risk of accidents and incidents. And finally, I want to pass on some resources so that you can all learn more about human factors in your own time. So what are human factors? So I got a definition here. Ergonomics, or human factors, is a scientific discipline concerned with the understanding of interactions among humans and other elements of a system, and the profession that applies theory, principles, data, and methods to design in order to optimize human well-being and overall system performance. So don't get confused by the word ergonomics here. I know when I thought of ergonomics, I thought about fancy chairs and how you're supposed to sit in front of a computer, but really it's just the study of how humans interact with their environment. Human factors started primarily in high-risk industries such as aviation and medicine, where a small error could have very grave consequences. So they wanted to use these principles to try to make their system safer so that when errors occur, they're able to fail safely, as well as to create barriers to prevent errors in the first place. Now, there's a man named Gareth, who was a former Royal Air Force flight lieutenant and flight instructor, as well as a tech diver, who saw how the principles of human factors that he learned in his aviation career could be applied to scuba diving. And so he founded a company called The Human Diver that provides training in human factors for divers. He's also the author of a book called Under Pressure and a documentary called If Only, and is currently the Director for Risk Management at the Global Underwater Explorers. So what is safety? Safety is not an absence of accidents or incidents. It is the presence of barriers and defenses and the capacity of the system to fail safely. So what this means is humans are human. We're always going to make mistakes. But to have safety within a system, we have things that prevent us from making those mistakes by catching the errors before they occur, as well as systems in place so that if an error occurs, there's not catastrophic consequences. When we're looking at analyzing diving accidents, or in other industries as well, a lot of times the cause of the accident is chalked up to human error. However, if we conclude that an accident happened due to human error, this adds very little when it comes to improving dive safety. So if we actually want to make a difference and improve dive safety, we need to look at the context that that error occurred in to see how that decision made sense at the time. Nobody goes diving thinking, this is a good day to dive. I'm going to do something really stupid and just see what happens, right? Basically, when an accident happens, there is usually a decision that was made that made sense at the time. And our job when analyzing accidents is to understand truly, why was this decision a logical one based off the context? So I have here a quick video that is based off of a professor called James Reason, described something called the Swiss cheese model as a way of explaining how errors occur. So we have these different layers in play, and these layers are barriers or defenses that prevent accidents from occurring. So he labeled these barriers organizational influence, unsafe supervision, preconditions for unsafe acts, and unsafe acts, which covers both errors and violations and is considered sort of the straw that broke the camel's back. Each of these layers has holes in them because humans are fallible. We all make mistakes. The system breaks down sometimes. Now, the issue is that an accident occurs when the holes in each of these barriers happens to line up. Now, typically, one or more of these barriers will prevent an accident or an incident from occurring because the system is designed to prevent these accidents. However, if the holes line up in all of these systems, then you have an incident. And the difficulty is knowing what else happened further up the chain to cause that accident. So when we're looking at human error, it's important that we analyze the conditions that permitted the incident to occur if we really want to gain any real insight. So when we are looking at diving accidents, the vast majority are caused by insufficient gas. Like a diver runs out of gas. So this is something that is predictable. It is preventable. And if it does occur, it is also manageable. So we are looking at what broke down in that system for this to turn from an incident where something went wrong into an accident where there was an injury or a death. So how come these errors occur? Typically, there are 4 different categories of error producing conditions, and we use the acronym WITH. So these are conditions within our work environment, our individual capabilities, the demands of the task, as well as human nature. So issues with the work environment can be things like distractions, interruptions, changes from our routine, confusing displays or controls, workarounds, unexpected conditions, complex or high information flow, basically anything where your environment makes it difficult to focus truly on what you're doing or where there's a change from the norm. Individual capabilities has to do with your personal ability for doing the task at hand. So if you're unfamiliar with a task, like it's the first time you've done it, or if you're just not proficient, you're inexperienced, then you are more likely to make errors. You're also more likely to have errors if you are ill or tired, or if you are not communicating precisely with the other members of your team, or if you have faulty mental models of the task. Task demands that can cause errors are if you are under time pressure. I know that I have been about to dive and we are under a time pressure, like everybody is ready, maybe except for you, and you're trying to get everything done as quickly as you can. And then you realize that your octo is trapped behind your back because you didn't check to make sure that everything was where it was supposed to be. So if we are in a hurry, we're more likely to make mistakes. We also have issues if we are under a high workload. We're trying to do multiple things at once. Like, think how many times you have had a conversation with somebody while you're trying to do something and then realize that, wait a minute, what am I doing? You skip something, right? Repetitive actions. If we're bored, we're more likely to make a mistake. If we have unclear goals, roles, responsibility, lack of clear standards, etc. Now, human nature, this one is the hardest to change. Humans are humans. We can't change that. The only thing we can really do is have a better understanding, excuse me, have a better understanding of how our brains influence the decisions that we make and the actions that we take. So stress is more likely to cause us to make a mistake. Making assumptions instead of getting information directly. Being overconfident, having an inaccurate risk perception, taking shortcuts in communication. These are all ways that we can make errors. Humans are all built in with cognitive biases. So essentially, we're being constantly bombarded with information from our environment. And if we had to make sense of every single stimuli that we receive, our brains would be overwhelmed. So in order to deal with this, we take shortcuts. We create mental models. We base our current situation off of previous patterns and experiences. And this allows us usually to make the correct decision based off of what's worked in the past. But our cognitive biases sometimes can lead us astray. So one such bias is an overconfidence bias. So if you ask 100 people, how good of a driver are you? The vast majority are going to say that they are in the top half. So most people want to believe that they are better than average. So this comes with pretty much everything. So you're going to think that you are better at things than you are. And that is going to lead you to have overconfidence in your ability to respond correctly. We also have a misperception of risk where we think that it is more likely that something bad is going to happen to somebody else. We feel immune somehow. Our brain has to protect itself by feeling like, oh, this couldn't happen to me, I'll be all right. It only happens to people who aren't careful, to people who aren't safe, to people who aren't as experienced as I am, right? Accidents happen to everybody. If we are overconfident in our abilities and we are overly optimistic that bad things can't happen to us, then that can cause us to be complacent. I want to take a minute to talk a little bit about the difference between errors and violations. So human failures can be broken down into errors and violations. And errors are like mistakes, they're accidents, right? The slip of action where the thing that we do is not what we intended to do. It could be a lapse of memory, we forget to do something, or it could be doing the wrong thing, thinking it's the right thing to do. Violations are different. A violation is when we break a rule. Now, some violations are unintended. We think we're following the rules, but we aren't, either because we're misunderstanding the rules or we're not accurately assessing what our actions are or what our environment is. Another type of violation are routine violations. And we see this a lot where the more common thing is to break the rule. I'll go into a little deeper on the next slide for this one. The next type of violations, we've got situational ones where you can't do the job following the rules. So sometimes either the rules are too strict and the conditions of the job won't allow you to follow the rules. Like maybe this is a new situation and the rules no longer apply. So you have to violate the rules. The final one, which is kind of blacked out here, is reckless violation, where you don't care, you know that you're breaking the rule and you just, it's not an accident, it's on purpose. And if somebody is the kind of person who is behaving recklessly, there's very little that we can do to prevent that. Now, going back to routine violations, we have something that's called normalization of deviance. So I've got a diagram here, which is using an example of speed limits. So if we are following the rules, then we are following the speed limit. 70 miles an hour means we're going 70 or lower, right? That is the law. That is the safe, quote unquote, safe thing to do. That is the legal thing to do. However, you might find that the vast majority of people are driving 75 miles an hour, where it is more common to be breaking the rule than it is to be following the rule. That's normalization of deviance, where this can happen for a variety of reasons. But usually it's basically, we broke the rule and nothing bad happened. So we break the rule again and nothing bad continues to happen. And so we continue to break the rule thinking that, you know what, maybe that rule is not very important. And this happens as a drift over time with more and more rules being violated until all of a sudden you're so far off from where you're supposed to be that you're in distinctly unsafe territory. So driving related, if you are not going 70, you're going 100, you are obviously a lot more likely to be in an accident than if you're going 70 miles an hour. Your response times are not going to be sufficient, so you're just going too fast. So normalization of deviance is the idea that it's okay to break the rules, everything's been okay. This is the new normal. So I want to look at a quick case study in aviation, where human factors were actually able to improve the safety of a lot of pilots. So during the Second World War, American bomber pilots were regularly having the same issue. I've got a diagram here of the controls from the B-17 bomber. You can see in the red square boxes, we have one that's showing the gear control to raise or lower the landing gear. And the other one is the flaps on the wings, the one to the right. So the issue that they were having was that a lot of times pilots were accidentally raising the landing gear instead of raising the flaps on their wings when they would come in for landing. Obviously, your landing gear needs to be down if you're going to land safely. So making this error was causing accidents. And the typical response was, oh, well, these pilots need to be more careful, or, oh, well, they just need more training. But this was a situation that was making errors more likely. This is happening under a stressful situation and usually at night. You're coming back from a bombing raid. It's not exactly a relaxing type of situation, and you're in the dark and you're going based exclusively on tactile information here. And these two switches are close to each other and they're identical. It's very easy to make a mistake. So a psychologist named Alfonso Chapanes recognized that what was going on in the cockpit was not a human issue, it was a system issue. So the controls were redesigned. They were moved further away from each other and they were shaped differently. The landing gear controls, they put an actual wheel on it. So when you touch it, you've got a wheel-shaped thing in your hand, and that tells you, oh, yeah, the wheel is great. The one for the landing or for the flaps has a little lever on it. So you touch that one, like, yep, that's the flaps. You know exactly what you're doing because you can feel it in your hand. And then, lo and behold, those accidents basically cease to happen. So instead of saying, well, we just need those pilots to stop making this mistake, they looked at the systems in place. They discovered why these errors were occurring, what could be done to prevent them, and they did it. So one of the key terms in human factors is non-technical skills. So our technical skills is basically like how we dive. We are using buoyancy, we're using propulsion techniques. Basically, all of our abilities underwater, those are our technical skills. But our non-technical skills are also critically important. So some examples of non-technical skills are teamwork, good leadership and followership, communication, situational awareness, and decision-making. So these things are all interrelated. If you are not good at communicating, or if another member of your team does not communicate with you, it's going to be more difficult to make a good decision because you might not have all the information that you need. If your situational awareness is not where it needs to be, then you might miss something. And again, if your communication is lacking with your team, then somebody else who sees that and you miss, they might not pass that information on. And then this makes errors and accidents more likely. Now, this is all influenced by stress and fatigue. All of these things start to break down the more stress and fatigue that we're under. And you can also see that it's all enveloped in something called just culture and psychological safety. So what is psychological safety? This is a shared belief that the team is a safe environment for interpersonal risk-taking. Now, a team member is going to engage in subconscious decision-making. They have to weigh the risk of speaking up against the climate versus the longer-term consequences of not speaking up. So what this means is there is always social risk involved when you bring attention to a problem. And the risk is going to be greater or lesser based off of your experiences with this team and how they respond when these sort of things are addressed. So if you are working with a scuba instructor and you've said before, like, hey, this tank is out of hydro, like, can I get another one? And their response to you is just to shut you down or to make fun of you, you are less likely to bring up any sort of concerns in the future. This sort of shutting people down when they try to share information really closes communication as a whole and makes it so we're not going to be able to address the sort of situations where errors are occurring. If we want to create a culture of psychological safety, we need to start with ourselves and make sure that the way we respond to people bringing up issues is being welcoming of critical feedback. So we've got 4 different stages of psychological safety that are built on each other. So without the bottom ones being present, the top ones can't exist. So we start with inclusion safety. Now, this is basically where a team member feels like they are part of the group. It is respect for an individual's humanity and permission to interact with you. The way we can promote inclusion safety is just by being inclusive, by responding, even if our response is negative. The worst thing that we can do is to just straight up ignore. Then we have learner safety, which is a respect for the individual's need to learn and grow and permission to engage in the learning process. So this is a really big one. Essentially, when we're learning, we are going to make mistakes. And how a person responds to a learner who makes a mistake is critical. How we respond to failure matters because people are going to remember. And if the response to failure is that you're going to get berated, then you're going to be stressed. You're going to do your best to hide errors. You're not going to come forward with questions that you might have. However, if you are met with somebody providing you with more information or making suggestions on what you can do to improve, then you're going to feel more comfortable and safe as a learner. Above learner safety, we have contributor safety, which is the respect for an individual's ability to create value for the team and permission for them to work independently. So this is where you've got quite a high level of interpersonal trust in the team. And each member has more autonomy. The team respects each individual member's abilities to contribute to the team. This tends to represent itself with more autonomy. However, in higher risk situations, team leaders tend to grant less autonomy as a way to just try to keep situations under control. Finally, we've got challenger safety. Now, this is a respect for a team member's ability to innovate and the permission to challenge the status quo. Now, maybe you have been doing something in a certain way for years and you've never had an issue with it. And then a team member comes up and says, hey, so I've been thinking about this. Is there any reason why we don't do it like this? And your response to this sort of question determines whether a person is going to come forward again and whether other people feel comfortable coming forward. Now, if we want to promote this sort of challenge or safety, then we need to be transparent about our own issues, about our own mistakes. We need to be, I don't want to say forgiving, but we need to recognize that to err is human, right? And there are certain times where if somebody is willfully breaking a rule, where they're being destructive or where they're just not being a member of the team, then that's a different situation. However, when somebody wants to raise an issue, the sort of climate, the sort of attitude that they're met with is critical for creating an environment of challenge or safety. So then we've got a just culture. So I have here from the European Aviation Regulations, a just culture is a culture in which frontline operators or other persons are not punished for actions, omissions, or decisions taken by them that are commensurate with their experience and training, but in which gross negligence, willful violations, and destructive acts are not tolerated. So what this means is if a person makes an error and that error makes sense for that person to have done, either they need further training, they're inexperienced, or it made sense to them at the time, they're not going to be punished. That error is going to be met as and taken as a learning moment. And that error is going to be analyzed to look to see, is there maybe some way that we can change the system to make it so that this error is less likely to happen in the future? And blame is the enemy of safety. So when these things happen, when an accident occurs, if the first thing that we do is say, oh, well, it's your fault for whatever reason, then that's going to prevent a culture of transparency. People are going to be hiding mistakes that they make. This is not going to lead to any kind of positive change. An investigation might occur to find someone to blame or to learn how and why the accident happened to prevent future occurrences. Okay, or to prevent future occurrences. These are usually mutually exclusive, meaning if you're looking for somebody to blame, that means you're probably going to stop when you find the cause to be human error. However, if you're looking to find out why the accident happened and to prevent future occurrences, then that can improve safety. So focusing on blames prevents openness during an investigation, can lead to cover-ups, and can reduce incident reporting. So what this means is that in the end, we have worse data. We don't have information when things occur. If we have a just culture, then people are more willing to admit their accidents, admit their mistakes. We can get better data. We can learn as a community what we can do to see patterns, to find out, is there something that we can do to break this pattern? So in summary here, humans are fallible, and even the best people make mistakes. Error-likely situations are predictable, manageable, and preventable. Events can be avoided by understanding the reasons mistakes occur and applying the lessons learned from the past events. A just culture is essential if we are going to learn from the mistakes we make. People achieve high levels of performance based largely on the encouragement and reinforcement received from leaders, peers, and those we work with. Blaming and shaming limits learning. We can't make all the mistakes ourselves, so it's better to learn from others and to share from others so they don't need to make those mistakes. And finally, it is best to be curious and not judgmental. So if we approach accidents asking ourselves, how did it make sense? That allows us to better learn from these situations and to make change. So what does this mean for us as divers? What are some ways that we can apply human factors to our own diving? Well, first on here, I have to cultivate a climate of psychological safety. I know a lot of us on this call are scuba instructors, are dive leaders in general. One way that we can apply human factors is by being transparent about our own mistakes. And when we do this, it shows our students and those people who are, excuse me, newer members of the team or less experienced, it shows them that it is okay to talk about these things because we can all gain lessons when we share this information. I recently saw a post on Girls at Scuba that was somebody saying, I went on this dive boat and there was this girl who had X number of dives experience and she was an advanced open water diver and she didn't even know how to put on her gear together. She'd done all her diving in Southeast Asia and I just can't believe it. How is that safe? And I saw comment after comment of people piling on this person who wasn't even present in the discussion about how ignorant and unsafe her practices were. Now, I can tell you, as somebody who learned to dive in Southeast Asia and whose first 4 years of scuba experience were exclusively in Southeast Asia, that after my class, I didn't have to put my own gear together, not once, for 8 years. And that if we want to help somebody who is newer, who might be more inexperienced, who might not have the knowledge, we need to understand the culture and the climate of these different places and understand that that was the norm. It might be a violation in standards that this person did not know how to put their gear together, but it was in line with the culture. And instead of blaming this person for saying, well, you should know this, we need to understand that we don't know what we don't know. If this is the norm and that's how we learned it, then we're going to think that that's okay. I certainly did. And then I started volunteering with a local scuba club. And my first day, they're like, okay, put your gear together. And I couldn't. And it was hugely embarrassing. And it was only after that, and when I started diving in the US, where the culture is very different, that I began to really understand where my scuba education was lacking. And if we want to help create better divers, we can't be judgmental of people when they come with a different experience base, right? Okay. So much occurs online these days. Like we have our own small niches, we have our own scuba communities that we have a greater influence over, but our behavior online also is seen and it is influencing how people feel, how people think, how people act. So don't be some keyboard warrior who thinks that they know better than everybody. Try and understand how this person's actions made sense. Another way that we can apply human factors is to always do a debrief after we dive. So our memories are going to be freshest immediately after an event. And even if nothing went wrong per se, there is almost always something that we can improve. And so it's important for a dive leader to conduct a debrief after every dive. Now, typically we want to start with the other participants, the other team members before the leader goes, and everybody shares anything that they feel is noteworthy. And then in the end, the team leader would also share their experiences. This is great for when there's some kind of misunderstanding underwater, and then you can talk what exactly happened before everybody forgets because it does fall out of our memories very quickly. So another thing that we can do to apply human factors is to use checklists. I have to use a checklist every time I pack, because if I don't, I will forget my socks and I'll be diving in my dry suit and bare feet and I'll have blisters because I don't know why, I just can't remember it. I use checklists. Checklists are very common in CCR diving, in rebreather diving, because if you forget a single step on that list, you can end up with equipment that will have a critical failure that might kill you on the surface, right? So checklists prevent us from making errors. They're one of those barriers to errors occurring. Another way we can apply human factors is by welcoming critical feedback. I was diving a couple weeks ago and one of my team members had an issue underwater and we were exiting, and he was trying to communicate something to myself and my dive buddy, and we weren't really understanding. And eventually he's like, no, you guys just go on, I'll go up. And then later that night, he's like, you know, you guys should have come to the surface with me. And immediately my heart sank. I was like, yes, I should have. You are 100% correct. That was not acting like a good teammate, and it was setting you up in an unsafe situation. And there was no reason that I didn't need to go up with you. I should have done it. Thank you for sharing that with me. I apologize. It's not going to happen again. I could have said, well, you told me to go. Like, why are you mad at me now? Right? But instead, I took his feedback knowing, yeah, I did something I really shouldn't have done. And so I'm going to take this as a learning moment and remember this. And then in the future, the same person is going to feel comfortable coming to me when they have some other issue. Making sure that the people that I dive with understand that if I've done something wrong, that that's something that they can share with me. And then finally, maintaining our diving skills and fitness. So I don't know how many times most people regularly practice things such as gas sharing. Certain dive communities make sure that they do these skills practices regularly so that if an accident or an incident occurs underwater, they are able to respond quickly and correctly. If we practice them incorrectly, we're also going to have issues. They say practice makes perfect, but really it's perfect practice makes perfect. Essentially, if you're doing something wrong time after time after time, that's the way you've learned it, is you've learned it to do it wrong. So making sure that we're practicing something the correct way and maintaining our fitness, it can be tough climbing out of a boat in 5-foot seas with a bunch of gear on your back. If you are not able to take care of yourself, you are also likely not going to be able to take care of your buddy if they have an accident or an incident. And so your own personal fitness is crucial for maintaining the health and safety of yourself and the team. So finally, I have some additional resources if you're interested in learning more about human factors. So there are 3 different levels of human factors in diving training offered through the Human Diver. First off, they've got a quick Human Factors in Diving Essentials class, which is like 90 minutes online, done at your own pace. Gives you a sort of intro to the topic. The next one, which is the one that I did, is the 10-week webinar, 10 hour-and-a-half-long sessions with independent reading and discussion questions each week. I found it incredibly helpful. It's changed my way of how I view diving, how I view being a part of a team. I thought it was incredible. Recommended 100% to anybody. And then the final one is a 2-day face-to-face training, which is all about working together, problem solving, team building, learning how you respond under stress, and building those non-technical skills. So if you're interested in looking more at any of those things, you can go to thehumandiver.com/training. And just so you know, I am not receiving any sort of compensation for this. I'm not affiliated with Human Factors in Diving. I'm just a former student that believes very strongly in what I learned from it, and I want to share it with all y'all. So if you want to take those classes, check it out, thehumandiver.com/training. And that's just about everything I've got for y'all.